Hi, welcome back to 180 Days of Lang. So, this lesson has two halves to it. The first half is going to be introducing our final speech, which in my series of lessons is the Harvey Milk Hope speech from 1978, which may present challenges in your classroom that you might expect me to talk about or that you might not expect. So we'll get to that in a second. But the main thing to know is that I let students read this one independently and work on it during class, because what I'm doing during class is calling them up one at a time with their graphic organizer for their Carrie Chapman Catt speech. It's the same blank organizer. I have it print and digital in the resources that students we do together for Frederick Douglass, but this one they had to do on their own. And I want to check their thesis statement, and basically I'm scoring it. If I'm using the AP rubric, the thesis row is 1 point out of 1. I want them to get the point for the thesis in this one. And if they don't, I give them some feedback. So some common areas where they fall short in is they just summarize the speech and they don't mention rhetorical choices. Point out in our model how we wove in those rhetorical choices, and then you need to go back and fix it. If students have a good workable thesis statement, even if it's not like super elegantly worded, I will just check it off, give them their paper back, and then send them back to work on the milk speech. If there's something core that's missing, they haven't established an accurate purpose, or they haven't established a couple of rhetorical strategies, maybe 3, depending on how long of essays you want, that Carrie Chapman Catt has done, then they need to go back and add those things too. There should also be, what they suggest should match up with their evidence graphic organizer. So if you're a little worried that, they've got some pretty thin notes and then this, beautiful thesis statement, and you're like, where did this come from? Their evidence should match up with the choices that they're going to analyze, so you might have them explain that and go back and add more evidence if there's a disconnect there. So if students have to go back and revise, they basically go to the back of the line after I've scored or looked at everybody's thesis statement at least once, then I'll start doing the revisions. If you have a huge class and you can't get to everybody's, this might be broken up into a 2-day thing. All right, so let's talk about the Harvey Milk Hope speech. So I know that some folks teach in teaching context where, for whatever reason, they have to look at this and they know who he is, they read the first sentence of the background, and they're like, I cannot teach that where I work. And if that's the case, I can't fight that battle for you. But here's what I will say. If you can preview your stuff ahead of time and you can explain the function of this and acknowledge that in the course and exam description, it literally says the word diverse text for diverse audiences by diverse speakers for diverse purposes over and over again, you might bring that up, and I would just submit this to your department chair or administrator for prior approval if need be. I would hate for you to make the choice of not going for a text because the author is a gay rights advocate, because of just feeling the political pressure to be more conservative. But I don't necessarily feel that. I will say, though, I am thinking about replacing this text, not for that reason this year, but because it is the most challenging one in the set. And if you have students that are starting really at the beginning of rhetorical analysis, like the appeals were new, those sorts of things, this might be a little bit too much of a stretch, because there's a lot of references to some local, hyper specific to the time period events and allusions that might just muddy the waters too much for them to really get into the analysis. I had to put in some footnotes about apartheid and those issues he was referencing to this one. And I find that students tend to gravitate more towards the other speech, the Carrie Chapman Catt one, for their essay, because it just feels more accessible to them. It has some historical context that they're more familiar with. But the essays I do get on this one are really good, usually, because they're students who are willing to challenge themselves and go for a stretch text. So there might be lots of reasons that you want to swap this out. I hope for you as an educator, it's not, am I going to get in trouble if I present this text to my students? Again, I think it's important that students are exposed to different viewpoints in their own. This is an important part of history. This is a milestone for a big minority group in this country, and it's worth talking about. In the course of this unit, we've been talking about of advancing rights. But if for whatever reason you are unable to, I do want to direct your attention to a set of replacement texts. I will link them in the description, but there are some other sets that I've used, and they're not quite exactly dead on this topic of advancing rights. So you might need to adjust your thematic topic a little bit, but they might work for a different, just swap out for a rhetorical analysis choice. Alternatively, you could just spend a lot of time on Carrie Chapman Catt and everyone does their essay on her speech. If you don't have a huge number of students, then it won't feel like too repetitive. If you've got 90 AP Lang kids though, you're going to want to give them some choices because you don't want to read the same essay every single time. All right, that's my little spiel on this one. I hope you go with the speech if it's a good fit academically for your students. And then we're going to repeat this process. The next lesson we'll be talking about discussion and moving through the